Welcome back, everyone, to the Mid Podcast, the show where we overanalyze superheroes so thoroughly that even Beast would tell us, perhaps you're reading a bit too much into this. I am your host, and today we are diving into X Men 97, Season 2, Episode 4, which I have titled this podcast Apocalypse Doesn't Want to Rule the World, He Wants to Fix It. An episode that somehow managed to be philosophical, heartbreaking, action packed, terrifying, and loaded with comic book Easter eggs that Marvel casually tossed into the background like they were hiding infinity stones at a garage sale. So, I've watched this episode multiple times, and every rewatch, let me spit that word out, revealed something new. That's the sign of a great episode. It's not just entertaining, it's rewards paying attention. Let's get one thing out of the way right now. This isn't simply another superhero cartoon. It's one of the smartest comic adaptations Marvel has ever produced. And yes, I'm fully prepared to argue that point. I'm going to give you some of my opening thoughts before we get into the meat of this episode. This episode slows down just enough to let its characters breathe before reminding everyone that Apocalypse is one of Marvel's most dangerous villains, and it's not because he's the strongest, but because he genuinely believes he's saving humanity. But wait, don't all Marvel super villains think that? Hmm. Well, that's what separates great villains from forgettable ones. The Joker wants chaos. Thanos wanted balance. Magneto wanted mutant survival. Well, Apocalypse wants evolution. And no, I'm not talking about the wrestling faction that had Triple H, Batista, Ric Flair, and my man Randy Orton in it. Different evolution. There's a huge difference. And the scary part is, he's not entirely wrong. Now, don't clip that sentence out of context. I'm not joining Apocalypse's cult. What I'm saying is that the writers understand something comic books often forget. The best villains make arguments, not just threats. Every conversation Apocalypse has in this episode feels like he's recruiting instead of conquering. No, that's infinitely more dangerous. Well, let's get into the biggest theme everyone is talking about and why I think they're missing the point. Most people online are saying this episode is about survival of the fittest. No, that's only the surface. The deeper theme is identity. Every major character is questioning who they are without the labels they've worn for years. Professor Xavier wonders whether his dream still works. Magneto wonders whether compromise failed. Storm continues asking what leadership really cost. Cyclops questions what being an X-Men actually means. And even Apocalypse isn't asking who deserves power. He's asking who deserves the future. That is a much scarier question. Because unlike who wins, there isn't a simple answer. So, hear me out. As someone who studies history, as a historian, is Apocalypse, is he basically just a history professor? Well, Apocalypse doesn't think in days, he thinks in centuries. Imagine arguing with someone who's lived through ancient civilizations, empires, revolutions, genocides, and technological revolutions. To him, human history probably looks like one endless cycle. War, recovery, war, recovery, war again. I bet you get the picture. So when Apocalypse says civilization needs to evolve, he's speaking from thousands of years of observation. Again, that doesn't make him correct, but it does make him believable. That's what elevates him above, well, your generic villains. Now, we're going to talk about Professor Xavier's greatest weakness. This episode quietly points out something fascinating. Charles Xavier has always believed empathy changes people. Apocalypse believes pressure changes people. Magneto believes suffering changes people. 3 leaders, 3 philosophies, only one future. That's brilliant writing because nobody is completely right and nobody, well, they're not completely wrong. Okay, let's talk about something I just adored. And that is animation is telling a story. Well, I watched The Lightning. Seriously, the artists are doing incredible work. When Xavier speaks, scenes often feel warmer. Magneto tends to be surrounded by colder metallic colors. Apocalypse exists between gold, black, and ancient stone. It's subtle visual storytelling. Even if you don't consciously notice it, your brain, well, it does. And that's just elite animation. So, I want to talk about not one of my favorite X-Men characters, but Cyclops. Unfortunately, this season, he keeps becoming one of Marvel's best characters. So, I guess I can finally say Cyclops' boring narrative is over. We'll come back to that one. Because whoever is writing for Cyclops deserves a raise. Again, we'll have to come back to that at the end of the season. This version understands something comic readers have known about for years. It isn't he's interesting because he can blast lasers out of his eyeballs. He's interesting because his leadership is exhausting. Every decision risks someone's life. Every mistake becomes personal. Now, notice how Scott constantly evaluates every situation before acting. That's not hesitation, that's command. Leadership isn't always charging forward. Sometimes leadership means making the least terrible choice available. All right, let's talk about some Easter eggs. So, I put this as my number one Easter egg, as most fans might have missed. Did you notice Apocalypse's architecture? Blah, blah, blah. It isn't random. The designs echo ancient Egyptian temples mixed with a little futuristic technology. Comic readers know Apocalypse's connection to ancient Egypt, but the celestial inspired design hints that his power isn't just mystical, that it ties into cosmic evolution. Well, Marvel doesn't just throw these design choices around accidentally. Every statue, every hallway, every symbol, it feels ancient and futuristic at the same time. That's exactly how Apocalypse should feel. Easter egg 2. Now, listen carefully whenever Beast speaks, because his dialogue consistently references literature and philosophy. That's comic accurate, but here's what's very clever. The writers choose quotations that reinforce the episode's themes instead of simply showing Beast is intelligent. He's not quoting books to sound smart. He's using history to interpret the present. That's exactly how Beast functions in the comics. Let's talk about Magneto and why he continues being the most complicated character in X-Men. Well, because every scene with him feels like watching someone carry decades of trauma into every conversation. Magneto doesn't trust Hope. Hope failed him. Governments failed him. Humanity failed him. So when Professor X says people can change, all Magneto hears is denial, not optimism. That difference, it's kind of heartbreaking. Because both men genuinely want mutants to survive. However, they simply disagree on how mutants are to survive. Now, there's a recurring visual motif throughout the episode. Doors, portals, thresholds, characters are constantly walking through entrances. You may ask yourself why. Because every major character is crossing into a new stage of their identity. Visual storytelling doesn't always need dialogue. Sometimes a doorway, well, it can say and tell you everything you need to know about that character. Now, why does this episode feel bigger than an average cartoon? Modern superhero animation often mistakes spectacle for emotion. We talked about that in the last episode. This episode understands they're kind of partners. Every action sequence grows naturally from ideological conflict. Nobody fights simply because the script needs a battle. They're fighting because their worldviews, well, they cannot coexist together. That's some storytelling. Now, I think I have one detail that everyone may have overlooked. Watch the background reactions. No, seriously. The animators didn't phone them in. Characters who aren't speaking still react to the conversation. Eyes shift, expressions on their faces change, tiny gestures reveal uncertainty. Those little moments make the world feel alive. Most viewers focus on whoever's talking. The background tells another story entirely. Well, I'm going to give you my final thought before we take a small break. And if the first half of this episode asks who deserves to lead the future, the second half is going to ask something even harder. What happens when everyone believes they're saving the world? That's where the episode becomes exceptional because heroes and villains stop feeling like labels. Instead, everyone becomes the protagonist in their own story. And that's exactly what the best X-Men stories have always been about. Well, don't go anywhere because after this small little break, I'm going to dive into some hidden comic references, some Easter eggs that may have flashed by in seconds, character moments almost everyone may have missed, and why one seemingly insignificant line of dialogue may have set up the rest of season 2. You've made it this far. Congratulations. You are officially qualified to teach advanced mutant studies. I've talked about themes. We've broken down philosophy. We've dug through some Easter eggs that you may have missed. Well, let's tackle the ending, discuss where the season is heading, and separate reasonable predictions from the internet's favorite pastime, making every Marvel theory somehow connected to like 47 different universes and a character who appears in one comic panel in, I don't know, 1989? So, let's do this. The ending is not about choice nor victory. One thing I absolutely love about the ending is that it doesn't frame the conflict as good guy versus bad guy. Instead, it's about competing visions of the future. That's a huge distinction. Apocalypse believes evolution demands sacrifice. Professor Xavier believes empathy creates progress. Magneto believes security comes before coexistence. Every major decision in this episode stems from those philosophies. Nobody is making random choices because the script says they have to. Their actions feel earned, which is the mark of some very strong writing. So let's get into why Apocalypse is so dangerous. Now, here's something I think a lot of viewers overlook. Apocalypse isn't trying to convince everyone, he only needs to convince the people who have already begun losing faith. That's exactly how dangerous ideologies spread. They don't start with people who are confident, they start with people who are hurting. Throughout this episode, Apocalypse senses uncertainty. He doesn't attack it. He kind of nurtures it like a mom does a newborn. That's why his conversations feel more unsettling than his fights. His greatest weapon isn't his strength, it's his persuasion. All right, I love a little detail. So, you notice how often characters stop before answering difficult questions? Well, that's realistic. Real people don't always have immediate responses to impossible moral dilemmas. This episode lets conversations breathe. That restraint makes emotional moments land much harder. And the animation during the climax of this episode, well, you know what I say about this? I think, for all of our sakes, it should be applauded. The animation team, give them a round of applause one more time. The action scenes are gorgeous, but what impressed me even more was the clarity. There's always something happening, yet the viewer never loses track of where the characters are. That sounds simple, right? Well, it isn't. Good action is storytelling. Bad action? That's just noise. This episode never becomes visual chaos. And I am the queen of chaos. Every moment communicates something about the characters involved. Well, one of my favorite subtle touches is how Apocalypse and Xavier both believe they're teachers. Well, I need y'all to think about this for a second. Professor X, he tries to teach through compassion. Apocalypse teaches through hardship. Both believe they're preparing the next generation. Their classrooms, well, they look a little different, which is the fascinating parallel. Let's talk about some fan theories, because we know fans, we all love to theorize on what's going to happen. Now, because this is Marvel, the internet immediately exploded with theories. Some are pretty clever, some, well, let's just say they belong in the same drawer as Mephisto confirmed. All right, let's talk about theory number one. And I don't mean Austin theory if you watch wrestling. Every scene is secretly setting up the MCU. Slow down, hold your horses, put the brakes on that. Not everything has to connect to a movie. One of the strengths of X-Men 97 is that it's telling its own story. Its future projects reference it, great. If they don't, the series still stands on its own. That's healthy storytelling. All right, theory two. Every character who disappears is dead. Come on, this is X-Men. I do love to tease my son that Gambit is dead, although he does believe he's going to come back. Comic readers know better than anyone that dead, just like in soap operas, is often just another way of saying, hey, I'll see you in about 6 issues. I'm not saying there are no consequences, I'm just saying Marvel has a long history of making death negotiable. Too bad, can't do that in real life. Alright, so what should you fans really be watching? Rather than focusing on surprise cameos, post credit scenes, keep an eye on how characters evolve emotionally. That's where this season is doing its best work. Power levels are fun to debate. Character growth is what people remember. Years from now, fans won't be talking only about who punched whom. They'll remember the difficult conversations, the impossible choices that had to be made, the betrayals, the moments where superheroes questioned everything they believed and were taught. My biggest praise so far is the writers understanding something that made the original animated series special. The X-Men have never just been superheroes. Their family, maybe be a messy family, maybe a dysfunctional family, but the kind of family that argues constantly but still shows up when everything falls apart. That emotional core keeps the show from becoming just another action series. As I always say, no episode is perfect, so I do have some criticism. And the one criticism is that I wanted a few quieter character moments to last a little longer. Some emotional beats arrive, hit hard, and then the story quickly moves to the next major event. And I understand why. There's a lot happening. But this cast is so strong that I occasionally wanted the episode to slow down and let these moments breathe just a tad longer. And it's not a major complaint. It's kind of a compliment. When I want more time with the characters, it means the writers have done their job. So, here's how I'm going to rate this episode. The story, 10 out of 10. Character development, 10 out of 10. Animation, 10 out of 10. The music, kind of let me down a little bit, so you get a 9.5 out of 10. The action, 10 out of 10, of course. Comic accuracy, 9.5 out of 10. So overall, I will give the total episode a 9.8. That's an outstanding episode. Not because it has the biggest explosions, not because it introduces the most shocking twist, because it understands what always made X-Men timeless. The action matters, but the ideas matter more. So, let's look ahead to the rest of season 2. And if it maintains this level of quality, we're not just going to be watching one of Marvel's animation's best projects. We're probably going to be watching the best project. We're watching one of the strongest adaptations of the X-Men ever made. I know, that's a bold statement. However, I'm going to stand by it. The writers respect the comics without being enslaved by them. They modernize the themes without losing their heart. And perhaps most importantly, they trust the audience. They trust us to notice the symbolism, to catch the references, to wrestle with difficult questions. That's something every adaptation should aspire to do. All right, here are my final thoughts. The greatest X-Men stories have never really been about mutant powers. They're about the fear, the hope, the identity, the belonging. We all, as humans, have questioned all of these things. The question isn't whether someone can shoot optic blast or control the weather. The question is whether people who fear each other can ever truly coexist. That's why these stories, they still matter decades after they were first published. They're not really about mutants. They're kind of about humanity in the here and now. And I believe that's why this episode works so well. And that's going to do it for today's episode of the Mid Podcast. If you enjoyed it, let me know what Easter eggs you spotted that I did not mention. I'm always curious to hear different interpretations because that's half the fun of being an X-Men fan. Next time, I'll be back to break down episode 5, analyze some big moments, compare them to the comics, and probably spend way too much time debating whether Apocalypse is the greatest X Men villain ever created. So, until then, remember, I need you to stay curious, keep reading those comics, and if someone offers you the chance to become one of Apocalypse's horsemen, maybe ask to see the employee benefit package before you sign your name on the dotted line. Until next time, thanks for listening, and I will catch you next week. Bye.